And we are live. Hey there, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. Welcome back to another Live with the Seattle Data Guy. Today we have Celina Wong from, well, you're currently the CEO of Data Culture, but before that, you've been working as a director of analytics at several companies. So thanks so much for joining us.
Of course. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, no, it's great. Well, I do like asking this question first because data tends to be an all-encompassing job that whenever we as data people get out and talk to people, it sometimes feels like it's all we talk about. So what do you do when you're not working and talking about data?
Yeah, I love this question because we do talk about data a lot. When I'm not working, I am often hanging out with my dog Wrigley. So I'm a big dog lover, dog fan. So if you have a dog, I will stop you on the street and say hi. I do hang out with my friends and family, but definitely a dog person. Aside from that, I volunteer with my alma mater, which is the University of Michigan. So go blue to anybody listening. And we raise scholarship money for local high school students who are interested in going to Michigan. So giving back a little bit there. And then outside of that, I think it's super important to maintain your physical and mental health. So I love circuit training classes where you move from station to station, a little bit of cardio, a little bit of resistance. It's good to get up from your chair once in a while.
Yes, I try to do that as well because it's otherwise I just sit here all day. So no, that's
Same.
100%. No, I love that, and I love that you do put some effort into giving back. It's always nice to do that. I love it. The other question I like to ask, because I think everyone sometimes has a different answer. How did you get into data?
Oh boy, how much time do we have? Because I actually got into data by accident. I was a financial analyst at Bank of America Merrill Lynch, and I was the business stakeholder that was using the drag and drop feature of a BI tool. And what was happening was that the dev team migrated from, I believe it was Teradata at the time, to Netezza. So for folks out there who've been around the data industry for a while, these are the tools we used back in the day, and they're still around, by the way.
Yes.
I checked their websites. And so the dev team working on that migration said to me that there weren't enough people using the UI to build the drag and drop feature. To this day, I still don't know what threshold that made that decision. But what they said to me was just write SQL. And yeah, as you can imagine, I'm like, what are you talking about? I'm used to the drag and drop feature for creating these reports. I don't know what you even mean by what's an SQL. And so I Googled it. And long story short, at the time, I taught myself SQL because I had to get this report out. I'm like, I need to keep my job. What am I going to do? Tell my boss I can't do my job because, the dev team decided they couldn't build this thing. And who knows how long it would take, right? We could be out a whole month. So I just ended up learning how to recreate the report, and by accident taught myself SQL. So, I think through that experience, talk about poor change management, but I'm still salty to this day, but very grateful that that this allowed me to learn SQL, which then actually got me my next job at American Express, and then eventually got me my first break into data in the startup world, and led me down this path.
I love that. I've definitely had people with a similar story. I remember one of my friends, she was had a finance background, and when she got her job at Amazon, they were like, "Here's a SQL book, so please learn it." Because I remember that was like the first time I heard analysts having to use a lot of SQL. I think now it's normal, but I think I feel like I don't even know when it was. Like it was just always Excel, and then eventually there was like this switch over, and SQL became more prominent as like a baseline skill to learn as an analyst.
Yeah, and I would argue that it's probably a baseline skill in tech, in the tech industry, but there's still plenty of folks out there that are still on Excel, and if you just drop them into a SQL environment, they would just look at you with, just deer in headlights type of look.
Yes. Excel's it's still that tool that it'll never go away. It just does. It does a lot for a lot of us. Well, before diving into how to go from an IC manager to director, I'd love to first get your current take on the data world. Do you feel like things are kind of more or less the same over the last decade or so?
I feel like it's a mix of everything, right? Like when we think about like what's better, what's worse, the same. I think what's better is that we have a lot more tools and resources at our fingertips now for folks who break into the data, folks who've been in the data world. I think that back in the day, here we are fighting with custom APIs, you know, fighting with an SFTP at all time versus now it's once in a while. And then, the other better component is that there are a lot more communities and resources for us to go to now, right? Whether you're new or very seasoned. I really love that aspect of it is that there are just more people to talk to in the data space than there were 15 years ago, right? And so I think that allows people to learn at a faster pace and also feel less alone in
Mm,
their learning journey. Um, but I also think, what's gotten worse is that there's so much information. There's so many tools. And now with Gen AI in the mix, I'm like, forget it. When people ask, how do you keep up? I'm like, this is very hard. So for folks that are breaking into data now, or even, for us out there in the data world, it's just gotten a lot harder to cut out the noise. But at the same time, I think what's the same is that outside of the data world, I think we're in our data bubble, right? And
yeah.
when you talk to, you know, business stakeholders or folks who think of data, maybe I would say 15% of the time because they're going to jump into their report and then go back to what they need to do. What's still the same is understanding the value of a data team. Like in our minds, we understand why data is so important and what it could be, what it could do for the business. But there are still many folks out there who it's not their job to worry about what does data do, right? So I still think that what's the same is still the disconnect of
Mm,
what's the value of a data team? Or can't you just, with the snap of a finger, just create that report? And it's almost gotten worse because with all the promise we're seeing out there of what could magically be done, right? It's just auto magic.
yes.
It's almost devalued the work of a data team.
Yeah. No, I think that's like the demand for faster development has definitely just continued. And in some ways, things are easier, but like you said, like in many ways, there's still just this gap in like it's because the demand's also higher. Like what was expected maybe 20 years ago was like, I need my revenue numbers and maybe a few, basic metrics. Now it's like, I want that and like, just way more depth about it because like the data exists, like you could get it, but now it's like, yeah, but we got to figure out where it lives. And so there is like this increasing expectation, not only in like the speed, but also what the data and like you can actually retrieve and show, and like what it does.
Exactly. Yeah, I think that like that gap of understanding how to even get to that point of like, yeah, I have my revenue number, but then I need to quickly understand what's the root cause of it. And we could just click on a button and make that happen, right? Um, and I think we've just somehow skipped ahead to everything can just happen. And the education of how do you actually get there, right? Like what is the state and the data quality of what you're looking at? Is it even in a warehouse? And the question of like, is there a warehouse, comes into question depending on the company you're talking to.
Yeah. Yes. It's and yeah, like you said, there's like weirdly the same problems in many ways. With that, so you've worked at a good amount of companies. Have you found that there are any trends around data in terms of both mistakes and successes?
Oh yeah, I think having been in data, and then I call it data adjacent when you're in finance, for the past 15 years and going, some of the mistakes I've seen, like two come to mind right away. One is one's the common like you're not getting insights fast enough, right? You
Mm,
get that question from the business, and then you go off and you do your work in your silo, right? And then you come back, you're validating the data, and 2 weeks later we have an answer, and you get back to the business, but no one seems to be excited because they've all moved on. It's not impactful. Oh, that's insightful, but I'm going to use it for next time because it's no longer relevant right now. But that then begs the question of what is considered good enough, right? Whether you're a data analyst, a data manager, somebody hoping to become a director, I think part of that evolution is understanding what is considered good enough. What is the question they're asking you for? And when do you know how to quickly answer it versus what needs to be slowed down and, need that extra triple check and validation? The second mistake I've seen as a trend is the data team works behind the scenes and other teams take your credit.
Mm.
And that one, I think, even seasoned folks out there may feel this because you're doing a lot of the work and then we're handing this off to a business partner who then is presenting, right, that net revenue number and the root cause that's driving it. And here are the signals we're seeing. And by the way, here's the growth opportunity we're seeing based on the data and potentially the recommendation coming from their data partner. So the mistake I see is that you could have a very strong data team, but you're working behind the scenes and you're not actually at the table delivering the results of your work, right? It's just your business partners going out there and speaking on your behalf. There's also the added dynamic of having a great relationship with your business partners so that even if you're not in the room, they're giving you and your team a shout out versus, this could be just company culture, but it's, my team did this and this is the data we're seeing from that. But forgetting to give credit to the data team that did all the hard work of cleaning the data, pulling that data, finding the root cause, what's driving, up or down sales.
Yeah. Oh, good.
Yeah. On the flip side, I think success trends that I've seen when it comes to working, in data is if if you build those relationships I talked about, right? If you even take the time to have coffee, lunch, tea, if coffee isn't your thing, right? It could be virtual because we're all in hybrid or remote situations. Take the time away from coding or building, the next report or doing the next analysis and get to know your partners, right? Because one, it's good to know your coworkers. Two, when it's time to give credit or when it's time to give business context, they're going to think of you versus the data team as an afterthought.
Yeah, I do have something like on mistake two, like how do you, or yeah, like 'cause you said success. So on the mistake two where you referenced not getting credit, how do you recommend people do get credit? Like because I imagine that can be an interesting contention point, like making sure, like, look, we want to make sure that our work is being highlighted, and that we're getting the right credit for it.
Yeah, I totally acknowledge how hard and contentious it might be because your partner's relying on you to give that data and for them to then go and present it in some meeting. There are two things that I've done in my previous roles, and I've also given advice to folks to do. One, is kind of like when I touched upon it and when I talked about success, building a good relationship so people remember to credit you in those situations. The second one is don't shy away from company town halls or company wide meetings where they're asking for folks to present on their work or to give an update, right? That's where the data team can also showcase what they've been doing. Um, and I think that shows folks like, oh, I remember that analysis or that insight being presented at that meeting. And the data team is talking about it right now. And this is the work that they did this quarter, right? Or you're also previewing and, it's like a teaser of some of the work that you're doing to impact the next quarter so that when they do see that work show up, they remember that the data team talked about that already and
Yeah.
we're excited to see it, and so that the credit still is associated back to some of the data team does, instead of it just showing up through the words or a deck of another team.
Yeah, yeah. I really the part about, like, making sure that that's communicated ahead of time, I think, is always kind of crucial, and then multiple times throughout as you're kind of maybe doing that work, because yeah, like you said, otherwise people forget. The other thing I really like from the previous comment you made that connected back to something I've heard a few people tell me is like making sure you create those connections, whether it's like through coffee. One person that I know says he would just throw happy hours at the end of the day, just whatever it could be to like give people a location that they could talk more openly, right? Instead of feeling like it's always work, really actually creating friendships with people, which can then lead to better conversations so you can understand problems beyond just like the traditional, like almost business conversations.
Yeah, I think we almost think about the word networking like it's a dirty word, right? And I encourage people to not to like take that word and park it to the side, right? It's actually about the first question you asked me on this, right? Which is what do you do outside of work? And that's a question for somebody else that you're, at your company, right? And whether it's happy hour, if happy hour is not your thing, and you want to just get lunch, it's about getting to know the person. And I think that that's in some ways like yes, we love data, but it's even more fun to get to know who you're working with, right? And because then when you get into those, like when you get into work, and at times you have to push back on one another and have a healthy debate, you both feel comfortable having that healthy debate versus it strictly being about business. And then it becomes tough, right? Because if the other person isn't great at having a healthy debate or shuts down, you start to lose context. It doesn't bow well for either party.
Yes, no, it's I've definitely found it very beneficial to like have that relationship so you don't have that shutdown situation.
Yeah.
Um, so as you kind of start to transition, because I think that's the main thing I want to talk about in this conversation is like as you start to transition away from an IC role more to a leadership role, how did that happen? And were there things you kind of did along the way to get the ball rolling?
Yeah. I think that when you're starting to think about how you go from IC to, to a leadership role, one of the first things I did when I was trying to make that move, number one, I was definitely nervous, right? So don't ignore your emotions of how you're thinking about approaching this. Um, but what I did was then, do what we do best, which is look at the data. So I started collecting feedback. This was feedback from business partners, like how am I doing? What's the impact you're making on the business? And even if it's not direct quotes from other folks, the fact that I knew from my experience, I was becoming the go to person for not only the data, but for also recommendations on what to do. So this was when I was, data person one and the only data person at, and I was an IC at my first startup, and people came to me for the data. But what you often find with the IC roles is that people either stop at give me the data and I'll just do it myself, or they're going to keep moving into give me the data, but also what do you think?
Mm,
Right? And that's when you start to see the shift into wait a minute, if you're starting to ask me what I think, that's starting to give me a signal that I'm a leader in some way, right? You want to know my opinion and thought on what to do next or what's the strategy here. So as that was happening more and more, I started to collect those data points, in the back of my mind and go to my manager at the time and said to him, I'm starting to see that I have a bigger impact on this company. And here's a combination of the feedback I'm getting from our business and my business partners. They were also sharing them with him, right? And giving feedback about the work that I was doing, as well as here are all the points in time when somebody's come to me for my recommendation. I'm not just building the data warehouse, just building a dashboard, just giving you a data dump. I'm also the person that people are coming to for what's the insight we're gleaning from this. And to me, I'm like, that's when I knew I am at a different level or I'm ready for the next level, which at that point, I was a manager and I was ready to move to a director level. Um, and in the back of my mind, even though I was nervous approaching that conversation, I remember thinking to myself, best case, you're going to get this title. Worst case, you're just planting the seed. And this is the first time you're trying to ask for it.
yeah. How do you build, I guess, the confidence to start sharing those opinions? Like, obviously, you're getting asked for it, but I imagine it's still, like you said, it's nerve wracking. So, was there anything you have to do to kind of build that confidence to be like, oh, let me, share this opinion confidently?
Yeah, I think that it was what gave me confidence was the coffee chats, right?
Uh,
Like, the coffee chats gave me context to what are you working on right now? What's the biggest pain point? What are you trying to figure out, right? Oh, I remembered you asked me for this data point. what's the question that you were asked to go figure out. It gives you context to then when I'm going back to the data and I'm presenting back, perhaps just give me that data dump is the ask. It gave me context to then say, oh, by the way, I remember you mentioned, something about the sales funnel and that you were worried about conversion rate at this part of the funnel. And because you were asking that question, I just took a deeper look into it. And here's what I saw. You might want to consider this. And I say might because I don't want to come across like I know it all, because I don't. And so I'm just offering it kindly as a suggestion. And when it did work out, people start coming back again, right? They're like, hey, last time you said this and that worked. Can you look into this part of the funnel now? Or I have another question for you. It's not even related to the funnel. Can you take a look at, this was a B2B company. And so they wanted me to take a look at by sales rep who was doing the best across different tiers of deals that we were landing or not landing. And so the questions kept rolling the moment that you're taking context and offering it, with empathy. I'm not coming across like you have to do this. I'm just saying, based on what we talked about, I like to offer you something so that you don't have to do so much work in digging into it.
Yeah, no, I like that. And I like how you also referenced, being empathetic there. I think that's kind of a key skill you have to pick up, both in data, obviously, but also as you start going up the leadership route and understanding who you're talking to, what like vocabulary they might be accustomed to using, what their problems are, and just kind of could list a few more kind of points there. But kind of on that skills notion, are there skills you had to pick up as you shifted into being a leader? And how did you pick them up?
Yeah, I think, stemming off of what you said about lingo and vocabulary, talking about the business and about the question at hand, uh, in a way that someone understands it best is what sets you apart from just any, IC to a great IC, and then someone that's considered as a leader. Um, I think the skills I picked up as a manager or as a people leader were anticipating, right? You hear a lot and you read a lot about being proactive versus reactive, but it is true. Those who anticipate are seen as leaders.
Mm-hmm.
And it's hard to just say to someone, anticipate the business, right? Because then it begs the question of, well, how do I anticipate the business, right? And that's really learning to understand what's driving the company, right? What does the company care about in this moment? Like every company has a P&L. You've got your top drivers and your top revenue drivers and your top cost drivers, as well as what are the OKRs? What are the strategic initiatives that are important to your business right now? And so that is the context that you need to understand how do you anticipate requests or anticipate what's important before they're even asked, right? Because sometimes that protects you against those long lead times, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like we all know, we've been in the trenches when it comes to data work. It doesn't happen overnight, especially if you haven't worked with the source before. So anticipating requests gives you that buffer time to work through it so that when someone does ask you the question, it does seem like you've got something ready to go, right? Or you've had some data point in your mind to answer that quick answer for the question, because it just seems like you're ready and you're prepared. So that's one. The second one is certainly people management skills. This one I think is one that pops up very often for data and tech folks because um, we're so used to IC work. You're so good at the technical stuff, and the people management skills become more of. I was just having this conversation with someone recently where how do you start to balance letting go of the pieces that you have to code and passing that to someone else and trusting them to do a good job, right?
Yeah.
And having to spend the extra time to review. And yes, you're going to do the PRs, but it's the extra time of that, right? Because you're handing a piece of code that you know and can envision how to do well into the hands of someone else. And how to coach them to do better next time. And that's tough for many of us because we're so, you're just very efficient and you're driven in that way. And here you are being told you got to slow down because you have to go and train somebody else. But in order to be a people leader, I think that is important to recognize uh, as a part of your learning journey when you want to be a people leader or you want to get into people management.
Yeah.
Um, the other part of people management is learning how to interview, and I think that is something that we almost like underestimate. You think, oh, I'm just going to get a bunch of candidates, I'm going to interview them, you're going to do a SQL assessment of some sort, you're going to pass this and we're going to get there. But I think that one, I would say even the first time around, I got lucky in who I hired, right? And every time I was hiring, you just got better and better at how do I assess talent? Like, what's going to be the marker for someone who is successful in this position? And then I would say the third thing is, I know this sounds cliche, but how do you become influential at your company?
Mhm.
That word gets thrown around a lot. The phrase of having a seat at the table also gets thrown around a lot. And what I really mean by that is when there's a business initiative, you know that you've succeeded in building the data team's influence if the data team is in the first conversation of when this initiative kicks off
Yeah.
versus being almost the last to know, right? Like, oh, hey, data team, we're doing this thing, or even worse, we launched it. Can you track the performance? You had no idea it was happening. That's when you're not influential because
Yeah.
someone forgot to tell you, and somehow you've magically have data to track, even though no one's set up the pixels yet, right? So that's what I mean when it's like this is the what, but this is the how,
Yeah. I really like that influential point. Like if you're the last person in the conversation or even somewhere in the middle, uh, it just tells you your importance. Whether the company says they're data driven or not, like that just told you exactly where you fit, especially from like a strategic standpoint. They didn't even ask. I also connected with you said like you got to slow down to kind of let other people catch up because I was just listening to, not reading, Radical Candor last night, and there was like a point that they reference. I want to say it was Sheryl Sandberg referencing the fact that the author was kind of spinning a long rope, and so what she felt was slow because she's in the center felt very very fast for people on the outside. So I thought that was an interesting analogy.
Yeah,
Um,
it very much, I love that analogy, because it depicts, that feeling of what you feel versus everybody else. The other, it reminds me of an article, titled "Giving Away Your Legos," and it was written by First Round VC, but it's really based off of a concept, from someone named Molly Graham, where it talks about how do you give away your Legos, right? Essentially, how are you delegating?
mm,
Um, and that is so critical in growing your mindset when you want to move from an IC to leadership, or even if you feel like you're in the middle and want to move further up the ladder. It's learning to delegate. And when we say delegate, it's like that depiction, right? Which is you're slowing down, but to everybody else, it's still moving very fast. But it helps move things off your plate where you should be thinking about the next 3 months or the next 6 months of the team, right? You shouldn't be the one thinking about, well, what about tomorrow? Occasionally you jump into that, but you know that you started to graduate as a leader the moment that you have more time to think about what is the vision for us down the road? Are we marching towards that vision versus you're the only one, coding, or you're just so in the weeds every day that you can't think about what's the bigger picture here.
yeah. Um, I mean, you kind of already referenced this other point in terms of like figuring out what the business finds important, but like through like coffee chats and things of that nature. But are there other ways you can kind of identify what the business actually needs done, especially from a data angle?
Oh yeah, this one I think ties back to my finance roots, but I think it's something that I think about for all data folks that I work with, and I give advice on this as well, which is make sure that when you join a new company, or even if at your current company, ask yourself the question, have you ever looked at your company's P&L, right? If you have access to it. If you don't, do you understand what the top revenue drivers, like I was talking about before, what are the top revenue drivers for your business? What are the top cost drivers for your business? At the end of the day, you know, we're all at some organization, right? And And if you're for profit, you got to make money and it's going to cost you some money. So how are you doing that? If you don't understand how that's happening, then you're losing a lot of context for, what the data you're pulling even matters, or what impact are you actually driving, right? And so for me, it's make sure you know that, because those are actually the big moving pieces. That's what's, when people talk about what moves the needle, it's that, right? Something that you're doing is going to tie back to one of those things. And I don't mean go to your P&L and understand what depreciation means. I'm like, don't do that. That's like, just extra credit stuff. It's about what is driving revenue for your business today. Can you identify that off the top of your head today? If not, I would say go find out. The other, outside of like chatting with folks and understanding the context of things, is just understanding what's the business's initiative this quarter or this year, depending on how far in advance the company plans, right? That's what they care about, because they just called it the initiatives, or they called it their OKRs. Now, I know from working in startup world that could change tomorrow, or you could take a left, a hard left, and then suddenly everything's different. But if they are making that pivot, make sure that you understand, like, when we made that pivot, what do we care about now, right? Like, make sure you're in the know of like, what is the most important thing right now to the business. Because that then, when you are in the weeds, right? Like, let's say you or your team are in the weeds of the data, you're always keeping that North Star in mind. Like, what are you aiming for? What is the data you're looking at trying to get to? Because otherwise, I mean, I've been there myself. The next thing you know, you're just in the weeds, and you've lost a sense of like, what am I doing this for? Like, why was this important again? Because now I've sliced and diced this for the 50th time, and that doesn't even matter anymore, because
Yeah.
it's like 0.01% of the business. Why am I even looking at this? So it helps you, one, either avoid those rabbit holes, or two, get out of it, because just because it's interesting doesn't mean it's worth your time.
Yeah. No, that directly ties to something. Shahar, do you know Shahar by chance, or seen his stuff? Flies helicopters. He posted something about when he worked at Facebook, and the head of data engineering at the time, his name is Vish. Now I think at Atlassian, and he said he brought a bunch of initiatives to Vish, and Vish was like, these are all really good, like 10% improvement ideas. I want 10x ideas, was kind of the ideas. Like, like you said, how do you actually make the needle move, not just how do you make small improvements? And then I think that just eventually becomes the level, right? Like, maybe as a manager, you're just trying to make things a little bit better, but I imagine at the director level, it's like, no, how do we just shift this completely?
Yeah, it reminds me of two concepts. Like, the one of them is you don't want to be bike shedding. You know, bike
Yes.
shedding, for those of you that aren't familiar, it's like, envision a house, or trying to build a house, and then the bike shed next to it. You don't want to be the one working just on the bike shed, which is the 10% improvement. You want to be working on the foundation of the house and building the house, right? Which is the 10x component to things. The other piece of it is really just, I think, like, when you think about IC manager director, it's, when shifting from that 10% to 10x mindset, you also have to start thinking about the business as if, as if you were sitting at the top, right? Like,
Mhm.
I understand you're not paid at that level, but you have to start shifting your mindset in that direction, as if you're a business owner, right?
Yeah.
As if you own the P&L and you're driving towards something. Because otherwise you're going to sit there and go, oh, no one's recognizing me for all the work I'm doing. And I would argue they're not, recognizing it because it's only the 10% movement, right?
Mm,
The person that's making the 10x, 20x movement for the company is going to get noticed, whether you're making a lot of noise or not. They're going, who's doing this great work, right? They're going to ask that question.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
so whether they like to, whether they're stopping or not, they're going to stop and notice, because you're making big waves.
Yeah, yeah. That's the needle mover comment also makes me think, for anyone who's out there who's like a UFC fan. I always remember. I don't know if you are a UFC fan. It's more of if Joe Reese was here, because there's the CEO once would say about one of the athletes, it's like, they're not a needle mover. And like, they're not a needle mover. It's like, they might be a good fighter, but he's like, doesn't make me money. Was kind of his way, which is sad, but just one of those funny thoughts there. I think one of the points you just brought up was, having to act like you're in the driver's seat, right? Like because at the director level or VP level, you start getting to those points where you're starting to either have conversations directly with the CEO, likely, or one level below that. And I think before in our conversation in a kind of pre-call, we talked a little bit about that, how you're the one who needs to bring ideas, right? Like you better not be the one who's waiting for anyone to tell you what to do. So how do you get to that point where it's like you kind of have that sense for like, I know exactly what needs to happen?
Yeah, I think it ties back to the, it's weaving together the understanding of what is the business initiative right now. It also ties back to the building a relationship, right? And at that level, it's building a relationship with your C level, right? And if you're not building a relationship with the C level, it's the VP level, right? Like what are the skip levels that you have yet to build relationships with? Because when I've done it and found it successful, it's because I was, like it depends on the size of your company. So when you're a small company, you better have a relationship with your CEO. Otherwise, I'm like, you're very much missing out, because at a small company, I remember sitting, relatively close to the CEO, right? And I would even grab lunch with the CEO, right? And get a sense of they're asking me questions, but I'm also asking them questions and pushing back on what they're asking me. And an example of what pushing back looks like is someone can ask you, can you give me the conversion rate for something, right? And they're just going to ask for that, give you the time period, and that's it. And to push back, I would ask, oh, I'm curious to hear what you're thinking about right now, what's
Mm,
sparking this idea, right? There's always some motivation or some reason for why
mm,
someone's asking. And that's what they're caring about the most, right? And that allows you to then not only pull the conversion rate, but then to think beyond that. Because in that moment, someone's asking for, one metric, but really you should be looking at potentially two or three more and saying, by the way, I know you were curious about this, and this is the reason it's been dropping. And
mm,
I think that we need to invest in XYZ, right? Depending on your business.
yeah.
And when you go that two or three steps beyond and you're talking to the CEO, what's happening is you're trying to make, her or his life or their life easier.
Mm,
When you think about like what puts you in that driver's seat, what puts you in the driver's seat is the CEO or whoever is the senior management person that you're talking to. They're inundated with tons of other priorities. So who's the most valuable person in their organization? It's someone who makes their life easier. And so if they're asking you for something, it's not just about giving that to them. It's also, by the way, I noticed this and this is what we could do about it.
yeah. 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 Solution, the problem and the solution. Yeah.
Right. The problem and the offering the solution. And you don't have to say it's got to be this solution because you don't know. You're just offering it up.
Yeah. No, that. I really do. I think that was something I recall hearing pretty early on in my career, for some reason, and really trying to stick with that, where it's like, don't just bring problems. Everyone has problems.
I've also heard that early on in my career is don't just bring me problems, try to find a solution for it. And honestly, at the time, it felt like a harsh line, but turned out to be so valuable.
Yes, I probably appreciated a lot of the things maybe some people would consider harsh, maybe because I need a little more direct conversation. Like, just tell me exactly what you're feeling. Don't try to like be polite. Sometimes it's just easier when you're just, hey, can you change this fact?
I mean, an example I thought of, that was like really good feedback that someone might consider somewhat more harsh, but I was writing an email, right, reporting on something. This was back in my financial services day, writing to a very senior individual. I believe it was like a president of a division that was, recapping something too. And an MD came by and reviewed my email, and so very analytical, maybe I didn't even know I was data minded at the time, but it was very concise, to the point, just writing this email and here's the data point, here's a recap, and that's it. And the MD came by and read my email and said, let's lighten this up a little bit. You're almost, and I said, shouldn't you be concise and to the point and deliver, the news and, or like, whatever I was recapping. And they said, yes, that's what they teach you in school, but this is how the person likes to receive
Mm,
information.
mm,
And I think those were moments when I started to realize, oh, even though I think, and all of us are taught, like, be concise and clear, there's a finesse to communication, right? Depending on who the person is, their communication style, how do they receive information.
mm.
Because if they just read my email and got offended for whatever reason, they would have just, shut it off and walked away. And who knows, maybe I would have been fired. Um, but in that moment, I just thought, oh, here's the difference between academic, right? Like something that's taught versus here's how it's like in practice.
Yeah. Um, on that line of like essentially communication, do you have any examples of stories where you've kind of had to like maybe almost like translate like that's one example, right? Like translating kind of maybe something that's either more technical or something that's a little just not in the format that the receiver would best take that do you have any other examples where you've had to do that?
Oh yeah, all the time. In fact, like I think in my current role, it happens all the time. You'll find that happening as head of data when you're leading a data team. That's a big part of your job, especially if you're not in a at a tech company, right? And you're working with folks who are predominantly non-technical or even not considering themselves analytical, right? I've had people tell me numbers scare me. So, and we laugh because in our world we're like, this is all we think about. But imagine if someone told you that, you know, all you had to think about was how do we make this creative beautiful? I would just look at you and you look at me and I'm like, I have no idea. This is
No
going to be the
idea.
worst. Like, this is going to be the worst creative ever. No one's ever going to convert on this campaign because we can't. You shouldn't leave me up to creative stuff.
No.
But vice versa, they're like, numbers scare me. So my rule of thumb when I think about communicating and simplifying technical things to folks is make it fun. Like just go in with that attitude. And I like to use analogies because it makes things feel approachable. But if you come in with the mindset of I'm going to make this fun for you, and the whole idea of empathy and making data approachable as your philosophy, then it makes the conversation more fun for you as well as for the other person, right? And one of the examples, actually, I have two. One of them had to do with talking to somebody who is in the marketing world, and when I said data warehouse, they looked at me and I noticed that they were confused. They're like, "What do you? I don't even know what a data warehouse does, right?"
Yeah. Yeah.
Because we're so seeped into our data world that we're like, yeah, obviously, but to someone else, it's very foreign. So, number one, I didn't look at them like they were crazy for not knowing. I just said, oh yeah, no worries. Let me explain it to you in a different way. Um, I imagine that you work in a company that sells products. Those products land in a physical warehouse, right? Because you have to keep those products somewhere. So imagine data in the same way, right? Where it's just virtual, right? It's nothing physical about it. It's virtual where you've got data everywhere. You're asking for it to be centralized. So we're just taking that and storing it in a virtual warehouse. And we call that a data warehouse. And so taking that analogy of something that is a physical, component to things and just helping them reimagine what does that mean when you're talking about a data warehouse and doing it with empathy without making someone feel dumb for asking the question, right?
Yes.
Because the roles could be reversed and we have no idea about some topic out there and someone could easily make me feel dumb about it, but I'm grateful for the folks out there who teach me something without judging me for not knowing, right? um, the second example was someone asked me to explain something about marketing attribution,
Mm,
which gets very hairy, as you can imagine. It's like, tell me about, media mix modeling. Like, what does an MMM tool do, or what does this, do? And at the time, I think I broke it down with a very simple analogy of like, imagine that your kids were selling lemonade, and you've got a lemonade stand in front of your house, and you decided to put up poster signs 2 blocks away, and then 3 blocks away, and you told your kids like, go tell your friends at school. And amongst those different factors, you're trying to figure out what's driving business to your lemonade stand, right? And I'm like, if you were able to collect data points on that and try to, assign credit to those different ways of marketing your lemonade stand, that's a part of what an MMM or marketing attribution idea would be. I know those two are very simple and considered basic to some of us in the data world, but again, it was like putting yourself in the shoes of someone who had no idea what any of this was about, and they needed to learn and then needed to put it in practice.
Yeah. And kind of avoids all the nuances of like, oh, and all these companies are going to fight over the fact that they're the ones that brought whatever the person or the conversion in, et cetera, et cetera. So
Yeah.
that's great. I mean, again, it is kind of, I hear a lot of people reference analogies and like how can you just make it fit, the person that you're giving it to, whether that means talking to them, because maybe they're like the example I got from another kind of director, Jessica, who was on I think a week ago. She referenced the fact that she talks because she's in oil and gas about oil and gas things to engineers who are dealing with this stuff every day physically, which is still a complex topic. But now she's just like, well, instead of talking from data terms, let me talk from their terms. So yeah. I guess as people are trying to learn more about becoming either director or manager, are there any books or articles or content that you recommend people kind of go through to kind of figure out more about how they can pick up those skills?
Yeah, well, I think about, so there are a couple of things that I think about when it comes to I want to take the next step and think about what's next for me in this journey. It's often finding content that some of it's actually outside of our data world. Like, one is, of course, how do you stay up to date in the data world, right? Which is follow folks like you, right? I follow you and I follow your content. I follow Joe. I follow, Soul and a bunch of other folks in the data industry to try to stay up to date and support your content. On the flip side, I also follow folks like Wes Cow. She's got amazing content on LinkedIn. She's got a great, I believe it's Substack.
Yes.
It's excellent if you're out there approaching, whether it's your first time approaching management or even if you've already been a people leader. The way she talks about management concepts is thought provoking. So if you don't follow her today, you definitely should. Um, the other book that I've recommended to folks is Leaders Eat Last, and that one's by Simon Sinek. But the whole idea is like, how do you become, for folks out there who want to be a leader, I tell you that the number one quality that I tell people that I just know they're going to be a great leader is the fact that they just care, right? Someone who's, people who approach me and they, like even folks on my team who are like, hey, I want to be a people manager. How do I start doing that? These are the things I'm worried about. And when they start telling me about the things they worry about, I'm like, how do I know I'm going to be a good people manager? And to me, I'm like, the fact that you asked that question is a signal to me that you're going to be a great people manager. It's not about you. It's about how do I help other people, right? Like part of it's about you growing in your career, but it's also about how you help other people. And so I think about the book Leaders Eat Last and that concept. And then the last one is, I referenced this earlier, but the article around giving away your Legos, because the only way that you're going to have time to coach other people is to delegate, right? And it's hard. I will admit that, right? You're used to doing things on your own, or you're used to doing things of a certain standard or quality. And so when you hire someone and they're just learning or they're more junior than you are, have patience, right? Like, have patience. It takes time to learn. And not only does it take time for someone else to learn, it takes time for you to learn to teach someone else.
Yeah.
So it could be frustrating, especially when you're so used to, achieving things on your own that you're like, wow, how can I help this person achieve something faster? And sometimes I would actually say, slow down and give yourself grace, and set a benchmark so that it allows you to have that time, right? Like maybe it's by 90 days, this is what I think I should do. And by 60 days, this is where we should be at, so that at the 30-day mark, you're not you're not beating yourself up because you haven't achieved what you actually should not be achieving until 90 days out.
I like that. I like that because I think many of us don't like we might have it deep in our head that like we know something takes time, but if we don't tell ourselves when that time is, like you said, we'll be 10 days in, 30 days in, and we'll already be beating ourselves up. Like why aren't we there? And it's like, because you've been doing this for 10 days, right? Like, why is my company not successful? It's like you've been doing it for 90 days. Most people do it for years until it's successful. Not everyone can be iceberg or tabular and have a 2 year and have an amazing exit. Like, most people will not be that.
No, most people will not be that. And, kudos to them and shout out and,
Yeah, of course.
but it's very much of I think that sometimes you see storylines like that and everyone's hopeful that they could be that, but in reality, if you look across, again, looking at the data and looking at all the companies out there, that's not how it's on average done, right? And these are more so outliers than they are the norm. And I think that we compare ourselves to it, and it becomes a really harsh comparison. Because you're just then beating yourself up for, well, how come I'm not good enough? I should be doing more. We should be moving faster than this, and it's just not healthy. You think you're just worse than you are, but you're actually not, right?
Yeah. Yeah. No, I really do like that because I definitely have plenty of moments like that where it's like, yeah, again, you want to be somewhere farther, but sometimes you're probably in many cases where farther than you might have thought you would have been. If you actually like look back and be like, I don't even know if I'd been this far. Like, if I was thinking this far when, 5 years ago. So there's that, and then on top of that, there's just certain speeds things take, and it's okay to take for anyone out there. It's okay to take a little time if things are just starting. Oh yeah, I saw a tweet where someone was like, if I like they're 22 and they're like, if I'm only a senior engineer by the time I'm 30, like it was basically like my life's over or something. I don't know what the other part was. And it's just like, I mean, there's a lot of other things you hopefully get to do with your life besides just whatever goal you have at work. But
Yeah,
I also get that feeling when you're in your early 20s. So
I've been there myself.
yeah,
I've also then led teams where someone, is in that mindset of every year I've got to get this promotion. I've got to keep climbing. And when I'm 25, I'm going to be a director. I'm like, let me be the first to break it to you that many people don't get there. And if you do, congrats. But um, at the same time, it's like enjoy the journey.
yeah,
Sometimes it takes years to develop, a certain skill set, especially when they're soft skills, right? And, if you make it there earlier, fantastic. But otherwise, take the time to hone in the skills, right? Because, you either get there real fast and then you make some hard mistakes and fall real fast from it, or you could take the steadier route. All of us have different ways of operating, but not everybody has to race to the top, right? It's not that. There is beauty to honing in on your skill set and developing it so that when you get to the next level, you feel like you're making less mistakes, if you will, when you do get there.
yeah. No, I just so much resonating at the moment. It's like, this is exactly I think what many of us go through, especially if you're driven and want to keep growing. You're just always beating yourself up in the wrong times. So yeah, I want to be mindful of time. We do only have 6 minutes left, so I'll see about. I do have a few more questions here. In terms of like bigger picture, do you have any thoughts in terms of like where data is going in the next few years?
Yeah, I think that I think about it actually. I think about it in two camps. One is all the tooling that we're seeing,
Yeah.
and the other camp is people.
Mm,
What's going to happen to us,
mm,
right? Um, I think on the tool side, I've seen this across many LinkedIn posts and many talks, and it's true. We go through business cycles, right? And depending on what's happening in the economy, as well as what's happening in our business cycle, you'll see this constant consolidation. And then, from that contraction, you'll also see expansion. So you'll see the fragmentation of tools again, right? And when you've been in the industry long enough, you'll keep seeing these like, oh, so and so is getting bought up, and all these companies are getting bought up, or they're failing, right? And the next thing you know, we've got new tools exploding due to needs, and then they'll get either acquired or they'll fail. So I think that in terms of business cycle, I think we'll see the constant like expansion, as well as consolidation over time. Especially with everything that's happening in Gen AI, I feel like the explosion of tools out there. I don't know about you, but I'll be honest, because I think people need to hear it. It's very hard to stay up to date. It's so hard.
Yes.
In fact, some of the advice that I think about and gotten from other folks is sometimes you actually just need to shut it off. Like, don't, some days I'll be trying to catch up on what's the latest, and then you got to give yourself a break and just focus on what you know.
Yeah.
Because if you're just in this overwhelmed state of trying to always keep up to date when it's not even relevant to what you're doing, it becomes overwhelming, and it's not healthy for you. Um, on the people side, I think, maybe I'm just looking at this from a lens of I want more people in the data space. I think over the next few years, we're already seeing it today, but more and more folks are getting into data, and in the way that you'll find data adjacent roles have to get more technical in their roles too, right? Like
Yeah.
think about your growth marketers today, and think about, we talked about finance folks earlier, where they have to write SQL or understand data structures in the way of how can I get, from the presentation layer of what the data team's given me, how can I then reconstruct something or dig a little deeper than just what's pre-built for me. um, and so with that, I think, just the power of needing to have data skills period continues to grow even more important over time. Especially, the positive way to look at everything we've been seeing with AI is everyone's also then going, oh, I need to bring somebody on board who knows how to look at this, right? Just
Yeah.
because I bought this tool, and it says that it promises to replace analysts, who's actually going to run this thing and put data into it. So in a positive light, I think that, despite, the challenges of like understanding the value of a data team, at the same time, I think we've seen plenty more data roles come on the scene, um, in the last few years. And I think that trend continues to grow. From a data leader perspective, I think that's where it has been a topic of conversation across myself and many other, data leaders. When for the folks who are listening, who are going from IC to director, and then it becomes, after you've hit director or head of data, what's next for you?
Mm. Yeah.
I think that you're going to continue to see this trend, and even more so that the COOs of the future, the
Mm.
CROs, even CMOs, are going to actually be, the data folks that are business minded.
Yeah.
So the whole, our conversation about having context and understanding how the business runs, you're going to see more of them, potentially coming from, like that head of data space, but having like the business context and giving the chance to move into those roles. The conversation around, I always thought, oh, I'm going to move into some CDO role, right, or CDAI role, right, because that's now a role. But you're still not seeing an explosion of those roles, right?
Mm.
And when you do get there, you look at what is being done, and they're either heavily focused on data governance and security, or they're more of a sales role. Like they're put in that position because they can sell the product of the company,
Yeah.
right? Um, so that's kind of what I expect to see in the next few years when it comes to what we're going to see in the tools that we're working with, as well as what does it mean for us, trying to climb the data uh, career ladder.
Yeah, no, I like that because I do think sometimes people feel that the data world can kind of have a terminal role. Uh, like you said, unless you like data governance and want to be a CDO, the more business-minded folk kind of get shut out, right? Like it's like the people who maybe enjoy the like, hey, I like doing the marketing aspect or like providing the strategy to the marketing team based off the data that we see, kind of might feel like they just hit a wall. So no, I think I like that idea of that, as maybe the C-suite becomes more data focused, that there is this possibility for data people to go in there, as long as, like you said, they have that other side where it's like, yeah, they also care about the business and they kind of understand, the terminology and what drives those other parts of the business. Awesome. Well, again, want to be mindful of time. We're at the top of the hour. One, I really appreciate all of this. This was amazing. I don't know. Do you have any other final thoughts before going, Celina?
Um, I think one final thought that I thought about just now when it comes to tips and things to keep in mind, when it comes to, I'll leave everyone with this, when it comes to communication. Um, a friend said this to me, and I think more people need to think about it this way, which is communication when done right is unselfish.
Mm,
And that just means many of us, with the technical background, will say something because we got to check a box or we just got to read the slides. But pause and think about, that line is communication done right is unselfish, meaning it's intended for the person you're talking to understand what you're saying and walk away with something, not just, I did my job, I presented. I was super nervous, but I did my job and that's it. It's what did they take away?
yeah. Yeah.
And
No,
that's what sets you
I'm
apart.
sorry. Go ahead.
Oh no, I was going to say that's what sets you apart from IC presentation to leader.
Yeah. I love that. That's I really like when you reference like the whole like, thinking about the receiver, because I don't remember what I feel like it was some sort of philosophy or something course at some point that I talked about that, where it's like there's like the signal, the like, what the significance and like the actual receiver of the, and then there's like a whole process where it's like, different things can mean very, very different things to, everyone. So no, I love that. Awesome. Well, again, Celina, thank you so much. I appreciate your time. Any other final thoughts? Other than that, I can hit end stream.
No, that's it. Thanks so much for having me.
Awesome. Thank you. Hitting end stream.